community. As someone who has lived in the heart of Chelmsford for the last 24 years and played an active part in our local community, I believe that I have got something to offer. I worked extremely hard on behalf of my constituents, putting their interests first, and one of the most heartening things I have found in the last 6 or 7 weeks as I've been knocking on doors is the number of people who've thanked me for the way in which I've sought to help them. It puts proof to one of the disingenuous statements in one of my opponents' literature, who seems to think I haven't achieved anything for Chelmsford as your Member of Parliament. If I haven't achieved anything for the Chelmsford, we wouldn't have the Broomfield PFI scheme that is going to improve the services for the local community, because working with Tony Blair, we stopped the East of England Strategic Health Authority from closing down that project which they did not want. To me, that is working for people here. Similarly, if it wasn't for the lobbying that I and other Essex MPs did, we wouldn't be getting the extra investment through the government for the carriages to relieve some of the rush hour congestion on our railways. We wouldn't have, on a more limited area, the emergency telephones on the A12 bypass, which was given to us following lobbying. It is those sort of things, day in, day out, that Members of Parliament can achieve to help the local community. Now, this election, important it is at a local level, it also affects us all because of what has happened nationally. I personally think that this discredited government has brought our economy to its knees in the last 5 years. I'm not quite sure how sincere Gordon's love of prudence was, because he hasn't shown much care of prudence in the last 6 years as he spent and taxed and spent and reaped up a debt of £167 billion this year alone. Now, any housewife knows that if their budget gets out of sync and they get into debt, they have to make economies and cut back to bring themselves back into alignment. And sadly, that is what this government and any future government is going to have to do. We cannot duck the issue. And to me, it is obscene that the cost of servicing the debt this government has incurred is more than we spend on our education budget in this country. So much for education, 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 if it's being wasted simply on paying the interest of the debts we've incurred. Secondly, I believe that we need a first-class health service throughout this country. And that is why I am pleased that my party is totally committed to the health service and will continue to increase the funding of it year after year in the way that the current government has. I also have to tell you on the question of Europe. I fought the election here in Chelmsford 5 years ago with 2 other candidates from the main parties, and we all 3 promised this country a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. I still believe we should have had a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty before it was implemented. The fact is, though, that night after night in the House of Commons, I was going through the division lobbies on the legislation to implement the Lisbon Treaty, voting for a referendum, to see the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party night after night opposing us and ramming through the Lisbon Treaty onto the statute book and ratifying the treaty without the British people being confirmed, being consulted. And that is why I'm pleased that if a Conservative government is elected, to stop the British people from being lied to again and thwarted in their aspirations, in the first session of a Parliament, we will pass a law that any future treaty-bearing powers from Brussels will have to have automatically by law a referendum for the British people to decide whether we are to approve the treaty or not. And if the British people voted no, then the treaty would not be implemented in this country. Furthermore, there is no equivocation. I have always opposed the euro. I continue to oppose the euro, and a Conservative government would not bring in the euro because we do not believe that it is in the national interest of this country. On the third issue that comes up on the doorsteps most during the course of this election, and that is immigration. Now, I believe that Britain has had a long tradition, an honourable tradition, of taking our fair share of those people who are fleeing persecution, torture and death, and we must continue to do so. I also believe that at times the British economy has shortages in the skills market, and we need to bring people into this country who wish to come, who have the skill that is required to carry out jobs where there are not enough people here to carry them out. And that too is right. But what I do think is wrong is to have an open door immigration policy for non-EU nationals who are coming here for other reasons and are coming here illegally. What we need, and what a Conservative government would implement, is a national border police force so we can actually monitor and police and control our borders. We will also cap the number of people that we allow to come into this country in thousands rather than the hundreds of thousands that there are at the moment, and we will tighten up on the administration of processing applications and also issuing visas so that we can remove people who should not be in this country in the first place swiftly and effectively. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 12 days remaining of this campaign. This country has a choice before it. It either can have 5 more years of Gordon Brown and the mess and the failure that he has presided over, or you can have the change, the real change of a Conservative government. Because what everyone who understands these things and looks at the evidence knows is that there will not be a Liberal Democrat government on the 7th of May. What there may well be, as history has shown and voting in the House of Commons shows, is that whenever the Labour Party gets into trouble and needs to be kept in government or put in government, they can always rely on their friends, the Liberal Democrats, to put them there. So, if you want a change of government, if you don't want Gordon Brown as your Prime Minister on the 7th of May, then the only way to stop that and ensure it doesn't happen is to vote Conservative both in Chelmsford and around the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Questions for Simon?
Thank you. There were 2 notable absences. You didn't mention the banks at all, which means actually I presume that you support their views. And their views were that this country should be run into debt on their behalf and not on behalf of the rest of us. The other mention that you didn't make was Maggie Thatcher. Now, you were part of a government which was run by Maggie Thatcher for a considerable time, and I presume you approved of that. Now, when she came in, this town had Marconi's, this town had Crompton's, this town had English Electric, this town had somebody else, I can't remember the other. Hoffman's, that's right, biggest employers in the town. Maggie Thatcher changed all that. Yes, she did. And she and her banker friends have run this country right down, and they've run this actual town into the sand. And you were part of the government, and you never put your hand up once to try and change that. Could you explain why anybody should vote for you in Chelmsford?
I'll answer the questions in reverse order. First of all, I'm proud to have been a member of Margaret Thatcher's administration. I still support her. She brought this country up off its knees after 5 years of a Labour government that took us to the IMF and the public spending cuts that were inflicted on us. She gave us back respect in the world and influence in the world. She won the Falklands War for us, and she restored this country to its place. And so I fully support it. Secondly, the reason I didn't mention her in my speech, because that was 13 years ago. I'm looking to the future, not harking back to the past the whole time. On the question of bankers, the financial services industry in this country and the banking industry is a vital part of our economic well-being, and it is very easy and slightly cheap to simply condemn bankers the whole time for all our ills. And so it would be a foolish person that sought to undermine the ability of the banks to make money that prospers the country, because they pay the taxes into the treasury that helps to fund public spending and our health service and our education. Where the banks have made mistakes, then they should be held to account. If they have made illegal actions, they should also be held to account in the normal case. But they got into terrible trouble because of the practices that they were engaged in on lending, which became too lax and too easy, and they have paid a dear price, and so have we. But the government should have made sure that the financial regulations that governed and monitored the banks were sufficiently proper to be able to have identified far before the problems came to stop them happening.
You opposed regulation.
And we've got a different point to make. Anybody with a different point? Somebody hasn't spoken already?
Hello, Mr. Burns. I wonder if you could explain to me why you saw it fit to claim for the food you eat on your expenses. I think it was about £3,000. And I have to buy my own food. I don't really want to buy yours as well.
The reason is straightforward. You may not like it, but the reason is straightforward. That when you become an MP, though it is going to change from the 7th of May because IPSA, the independent body, has taken over and revised the rules. But when I became an MP, when anyone became an MP up until 2005, you were issued with a book that explained what you could claim for because of the hours we work and the time we have to spend at the House of Commons. It is in some ways similar to any other businessman who has to go away from home to carry out their business activities, who also get an allowance to claim for food and for lodging. And that, yes, you are, but you are also paying for civil servants, Ministry of Defence, and others who go away. The reason is that was part of the job conditions and terms, and that was what we were entitled to claim, and that is what I and many other members of Parliament did claim.
You're happy with that?
No, I've just told you, from whenever it is, from the 7th of May, the rules are completely changing, and in fact, I haven't been claiming for food for almost a year now because I don't have a second home, because as a result of all the publicity last May, June, it was quite clear that one had to listen to the anger of the public.
Between immigration from outside the EU to immigration from inside the EU. And also, why are we discriminating against those countries that supported us through our endeavours, e.g. the First and Second World War, likes of Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and all those other countries that we owe a lot to?
Thank you. Well, I wouldn't actually accept the word discrimination. The fact is that as members of the EU, except for those new countries where we have got derogations on the people who we will allow to come into this country, the others, there is free movement of labour, just as British people go and live in Spain, France, wherever, and go and work in the rest of the EU. EU nationals will come into this country. Where we are seeking to draw a line is for the countries outside the EU, where they are seeing this country, many people are, as a way to escape as economic migration to hopefully improve their standard of living. And I'm afraid that we are too small a country geographically, and we are too ill-equipped financially to sustain that level of immigration, which has been in recent years, to many people's minds, almost an open door immigration policy with very few controls on it. And I do believe we have got to put a stop to that, because the country cannot sustain it, nor can the infrastructure, nor can the services. And it's not discrimination, it is just common sense.
Thank you very much, Simon. Something that they can all have a view on, and we can compare and contrast, so when we go along on Thursday week we know exactly where we're going to put our cross. So can I have the candidates back along, please?
I've got a question.
And I'll try and referee this as best I can.
Okay, yeah, I've got a question for all the candidates. What it is, I'm a lecturer. Can you listen? A lecturer at a university in London, and what's happening across the higher education sector and across further education, which is about the future of the children of every single person that's standing here in this square. What's happening is we are losing at the moment about 10,000 jobs of lecturers in further and higher education. At my own college, there are 200 lecturers who are about to be made redundant. Now, I think I heard from the Labour candidate that there was some commitment to higher education. Could you explain that commitment when I had to sit through, on Thursday, a redundancy meeting? I was representing 4 lecturers who together had over 100 years of experience in their field who are being made redundant. This is happening in arts universities, it's happening at the London School of Economics, this is happening across London, it's happening across Britain. I want to know what the candidates are going to do to give investment, to put investment into higher education, into our universities, for our children's future.
Same problem that applies to so many other things. We are spending or getting rid of money in the wrong places. Wasting money in the EU, wasting money on admin and on quangos, and not putting it into things like education. I absolutely agree with you. We've got to invest in our future. Our total future depends on it. Our young people need the jobs. If we're going to be competitive and make our way in the world, we need to spend money on it and stop wasting money in other places. Thank you.
We do, as I said when I spoke earlier, we do need to invest in education, and the difference between us and the other parties is we've made some specific pledges. They're costed. It's in the manifesto. We have said how we will abolish university tuition fees over a 5-year period. That will be made up from the taxpayer, and we've said how we'll pay for it. We've identified some savings across the board, and we've identified some additional spending commitments. We need to invest in higher education. We don't want to put any young person off from going into higher education if a university education is appropriate. But we oppose Labour's arbitrary target of 50% into higher education because it may not be appropriate. We may need more vocational training. We want to support and increase the adult learners grant and support apprenticeships, for instance. We will increase that to £45 a week. So there are other things that we can do as well to support sort of the FE and apprenticeship sector, not just higher education, all of which are so important.
It is very important that everyone has a good chance, and young people especially need to be given a lift. That's why we're investing in education at every level, which is Sure Start centres, schools, MVQs and university. Okay, there will have to be prioritisation made, and
10,000 jobs lost, I'm sorry. That's not a prioritisation in the right way. That's against the future of this generation.
Well, we are still investing hugely.
In the area of further education, as part of our programme to help young people, we will be creating 100,000 apprenticeships and 30,000 extra places in FE colleges, and obviously the money would then follow those places, which would help with the investment.
And of course, education is a devolved issue. What that means is that the Scottish Parliament and Alex Salmon are deciding what happens for Scotland, and they're deciding that based on a huge subsidy from England and English taxpayers. House of Lords report last year said the Barnett formula, which is this contribution from English taxpayers to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, is running at £49 billion a year. And if we had some of that, we might be able to sort out the kind of problem that the gentleman's referring to.